Welcome back to the Blue Chip Breakdown, Vols fans. I'm your host, Bull, and today's video is going to be covering the collapse of the Tennessee Volunteers in a game that they had under control in the first half, 20-7, up against the Alabama Crimson Tide, and end up losing 34-20 in Tuscaloosa. Really tough loss. Let's go ahead and kind of jump into some of the stats for this game. All right, so we're going to take a big picture view of the overall game from a stats perspective. When it comes to first down, Tennessee won. We had 22 first downs to Alabama's 20. On third downs, Tennessee was 8 for 18. Alabama was 5 for 13. So we had more third down conversions than Alabama did. And on fourth down, Tennessee was 0 for 3, and Alabama didn't even go for it on fourth down. Now, obviously, this was a big turning point in this football game. There were some situations that we probably could have gotten those first downs on fourth down. Didn't necessarily like that play call. How it works in a fourth down situation is coaches have a whole bunch of plays that are just fourth down plays, right? So you've got plays for different downs and different distances, things like that. And then you're going to pretty much minimize that big group of plays for the team that you're playing against. And, you could also draw up some plays, if the team has a special personnel grouping or anything like that. But those plays should be, more than 90%. You should feel like you can convert on those plays. There was one, I want to say Tennessee may have been like on their own side of the football field, and we go for it on a 4th and inches, and we hand the ball off to Dylan Sampson, and I absolutely love Dylan Sampson, but that just was not the correct play call there. I mean, I feel like there was a better opportunity just to try to run Joe Milton. A lot of people are saying, why don't we get up under center? And I'm kind of on the same page with y'all. That could have been maybe a little bit easier from under center just to try to sneak it and get that push. Thing about it is, I believe that happened in the second half. And in the second half, this is something else that we're going to kind of get into. Alabama's front was really beating Tennessee's front, especially in the situations where it was an obvious, run formation from Tennessee. So saying all that just to say, I think that the play calling could have been a lot better from Josh Heupel in those fourth down situations. That's the only place that we kind of, lost at. I mean, obviously that's a big place to lose at, especially on your own side of the football field. And, I'm sure the Coach Heupel wished that he could have those plays back. We talked about it after last week's game up against Texas A&M. And, he said, hey, maybe there were some situations where I could have taken points or punted. That's just not who he is as a coach. But he's going to have to kind of coach a little bit more in this category towards his team's strengths and towards his team's weaknesses. If you know that you're playing up against a team that is physically dominating you up front, probably is not the best situation to go for it on a 4th and short situation, unless, again, you've got a great play kind of dialed up. And, it's tough to try to put the ball in the air in those situations, too. It's just, you have to be really sure. So kind of wish that we would have punted and, gave Alabama a longer field to have to drive down because I believe Alabama converted a touchdown after that 4th and short that Tennessee did not convert. All right, so moving on, total yards, Tennessee had more, 404 yards to 358 yards. Tennessee ran 79 plays, Alabama ran 63. So we won there. Passing, Tennessee passed for 271 yards. We were 28 for 41, which is 68%, no interceptions. Alabama threw for 220 yards, 14 of 21, which is 66%, and 1 interception. Again, Tennessee won in this category. Rushing, Tennessee had 133 yards rushing on 38 carries, averaged 3.5 yards per carry, which is lower than our season average, which was coming into this game was 5.8. Our leading rusher was actually Joe Milton. He had 15 carries for 59 yards with a 3.9 yards per carry average. Alabama rushed the football for 138 yards, which is 5 more than Tennessee. They ran the ball more than Tennessee as well. Ran the ball 42 times, and they averaged 3.3 yards per carry. So, that is right around what their normal average is. It's a little bit higher than what it normally is. Not a lot of that came from Milroe, okay? Their running back, I think he had 117 yards for 4-point-something yards per carry. So if you look at it from that perspective, it looks close inside of the box score, but if you actually watch that football game, Alabama did a much better job running than Tennessee did. And that's something that we're going to have to, get better at for sure throughout the season. One of my biggest issues with the way that we ran that football in this game was most definitely Tennessee didn't do a great job of spreading Alabama out, which is what we thought coming into this game Tennessee would do. Spread them out, flex that tight end, and make that box as light as possible and force them to, overcompensate for Tennessee's run game once we can really get it going. And we just didn't see a whole lot of that from Tennessee, especially in that second half. There's a lot of tight formations, a whole lot of bringing that tight end into the box. And then Alabama's able to kind of load that box up more. And I mean, listen, guys, I'm just going to call it like it is. They've got more talented players than we do, top to bottom. We all know that, or at least we all should know that. They have had some excellent classes. They're usually top 3 every single year. They've got a bunch of 5 stars at every single level, offense, defense, special teams. And Tennessee's just not there yet. I think we may have, 1, maybe 2 5 stars on this roster right now currently. So we have been, overcoaching or kind of like up coaching our talent to be able to compete with some of these more talented football teams. And we've been out scheming them, having to out coach them to be able to, win a lot of these games. But at some point, whenever it just gets down to straight up football, straight up smack you in the mouth football, Tennessee has got to continue to be more creative to be able to win in those situations. And I just don't feel like Tennessee did a good job of that yesterday in this big matchup. All right, so next stat is about penalties. This is one that everyone has been talking about. I talked about it, Pete talked about it in our post-game live stream yesterday. Tennessee had 8 penalties for 55 yards, and Alabama had 1 penalty for 5 yards. Okay, so Tennessee's average is 8 per game. So we average 8 penalties per game. Tennessee and Alabama both came into this game with 48 penalties, albeit Alabama played 1 more game than Tennessee did coming into this game. So their average was a little bit lower at 6.8 penalties per game. This right here, obviously, there were some, it wasn't even. I'll just say that. It did look like the referees were letting Alabama play a lot more than they were letting Tennessee play. But I will say this, out of those 8 penalties, we know that 4 of those were pre-snap penalties. And I'm just thinking off the top of my head, Omar Norman had 2 offsides penalties back-to-back. Okay, so that's 2 of them. And then Dane Davis had 2 false start penalties, it seems like back-to-back or within the same drive. So that's 4. That's half of our penalties were pre-snap. Now, in the same drive where Omar Norman had those 2 offsides, right after that, Alabama comes out with their first and only penalty of this game with a 5-yard false start penalty. Really, really hard to imagine a game like this. If you look at the way that this matchup was set up, Alabama has been struggling to block pass rushers throughout this entire season. And Tennessee has had one of the best pass rushes in this entire country throughout this entire season. You cannot tell me that there were not some holding calls that could have been made, because I'll just tell you this, guys, you can call holding on every single play in football, because the way that it's taught, they teach you to hold. It's just, is the referee going to call it or not? Now, obviously, it wouldn't be very entertaining to see penalties being thrown on every single play. So referees kind of pick and choose when they throw those flags. A lot of times it has to be a lot there, or it has to be something that was very beneficial to that play for referees to throw those flags. And I can tell you this, after watching this film one time, that there were a few calls, especially in that second half, that the referees just blatantly did not call. They didn't call it on us. And, they didn't call it on Bama, but they called it on us. So, yes, did they play a role in this game? For sure, absolutely. Were they the determining factor in Tennessee losing? I would have to say no. I think that in the second half, overall, Tennessee just pretty much kind of got whipped. And, I think that we got outcoached as well. So, moving on. Next one is turnovers. Tennessee also won in this category. 1 turnover to Alabama's 2. Now, we know that 1 turnover for Alabama was a scoop and score on a strip sack fumble, and Tennessee got an interception, and we got, I believe, a fumble. Even though we had less turnovers than Alabama, whenever you score on one of those turnovers, I mean, that is a big, big deal. So that one right there hurt us. I mean, that's just the only way that I can say it. That hurt us pretty bad. It was a blindside hit on Joe Milton, and there's really nothing that he could have done about that play. Again, I've only watched the film one time. I'm going to go back and kind of dissect that play again as much as I can and see if there's maybe somebody was open or maybe he could have run. But I think that at the end of the day, John Campbell just got whipped and his guy was able to make a play. That's going to happen sometimes. Next is time of possession. Tennessee had 27 minutes and 41 seconds, and Alabama had 32 minutes and 19 seconds. Now, this is a category right here that I think that Tennessee could have done a better job at, especially coming out in that second half. Now, albeit, again, just talked about penalties. The one penalty that I did not talk about that we all know about was that fair catch thing. And I believe that was a penalty. A lot of people are asking, how did Tennessee end up with the ball on their own 4-yard line? I believe that Cam Seldon took the ball to the 19-yard line, and there was a 15-yard penalty. So if you call for a fair catch and if you still run it, that's supposed to be a 15-yard penalty. So 19 minus 15 is 4, and I think that that's what ended up happening there. Is I think that there was a penalty that was called, and that's why Tennessee ends up with the ball there. Now, getting into that penalty before we go back into everything else here, that was a terrible call. You know, putting your arms out to the side is not signaling a fair catch by any means. It never has been. That is a horrible call. I've been around football for a very long time, and that's never been a fair catch call. You have to obviously signify with your hand up over your head. You've got to wave it. You have to make it very clear that you're calling for a fair catch. So that was a terrible call by those referees. And we know it coming into this game that, you know, the fix in some ways was going to be on, and it always is. Whenever you go to Tuscaloosa, you have got to know that they're going to cheat some. That's just how this game goes. I don't care what anybody says. And again, I'm not saying that the penalties is what lost Tennessee this football game, but I'm just speaking facts, okay? We know this as facts. College football, you know, any type of big time football, there is a whole lot of stuff that happens behind the scenes with the spreads and all that with sports betting. That is just the stone cold truth. And if you think that people can't come in and influence everyone on every level with a couple of dollars to say, hey, let's shave some points here, let's add some points there and make sure that it goes the way that it needs to, you would be very naive. That does happen. It does not get talked about very often, but I promise you that happens. So anyway, after that big penalty that set Tennessee back, we end up, obviously with our backs up against our own end zone. We've got to run the ball 3 times. That was, starting up the second half. That was I believe our first possession in the second half. And we just could not get our run game going in the second half. And that kind of started. Now, we did a pretty decent job of running in that sequence. But, again, I just don't feel like we spread Alabama out enough. And, it just is what it is at the end of the day. If we could have came out in that second half, and again, ifs, woulda, coulda, shoulda. But I feel like the objective for the second half was to try to control that clock as much as we possibly could and to try to shorten that game up as much as we possibly could and get out of Tuscaloosa with a win. We just were not able to do that because, again, we weren't able to run the football at a high enough clip. Next category is sacks. Now, Tennessee had 4 sacks and Alabama only had 3. Again, there were several times that we got held. Okay, there's been the picture and the video circulating on Twitter of Tyler Barron getting held. A lot of our guys were getting held. I saw Roman Harrison getting held on 2 or 3 plays that actually ended up being some bigger plays. And these weren't necessarily on passing plays, they were on running plays. But saying all that just to say Alabama did hold us. But at the end of the day, that stout offensive line, and I know this is weird to say that, but what I mean by stout is they're big. They're a really big offensive line, averaging 350 pounds. We weren't able to push them around as much as we were up against other teams. And that's just what it is. That, that was something that we hadn't seen. And our performance was subpar due to that fact. Now, 4 sacks is not terrible. Obviously, that's really, really good getting 4 sacks in. But I think that we could have done, a better job of bringing pressure. This is where Tim Banks, you would like to have seen more pressures being dialed up. Bring a little bit more. If you're not getting home with that front 4 like we talked about, bring more. You've got to be able to continue to blitz. We did mix it up a little bit, and we did a pretty decent job of getting to Milroe and kind of keeping pressure on him. But there were also some situations where he was able to kind of stand back there and, throw some deep. So got to do a better job at that. We've got to do a better job of filling out and being real with ourselves and knowing when our front 4 is just not getting the job done, and be more creative in finding ways to continue that pressure on the opposing team's quarterbacks. Next stat is going to be tackles for loss. So Tennessee had 5 and Alabama had 8. This kind of just goes back to the simple fact that, again, we didn't spread that field out, and Tennessee saw a much heavier box. Alabama was king on our run all game. We knew that was going to happen. And, they were able to have a lot of success up front. It's difficult to block Alabama's core good guys, even if it's only 4 or 5 guys. Once it gets to 6, 7, and sometimes 8, it's really tough to be able to block them. And, it's really tough, especially in those running plays where we've got to be able to convert some yardage on the ground. We just didn't do a good job of getting a good push up against Alabama's front, especially in that second half. All right, so with all that being said, again, it just seems like Tennessee came out in the second half, got out coached, kind of got out physical up front, and we just didn't have the type of success that we had in that first half. Not quite sure what happened. It feels like both teams were playing hard in that first half. I would, again, I'm really going to kind of put a lot of that on coaching. We've got to learn to spread teams out. If we're honest with ourselves, and if we know that the team that we're playing up against is going to be better than us up front, we've got to find a way to out-scheme them. And you out-scheme good defenses by spreading them out and by running right at them. Something that Tennessee has done a really good job of throughout this season. We just didn't do a good job of it in that second half. But we still have a lot to play for in this season, okay? Florida right now, I believe, is ahead of us in the SEC. And, we can still get to the SEC championship game. We can still win the East. But what we're going to need is for, I believe, Florida to probably lose another SEC game. Maybe that would be good. And they've got Georgia coming up this week. That would be good if either one of those teams loses. I mean, that's going to be a positive for Tennessee moving forward. Either one, it's going to help to kind of balance out the playing field for Tennessee. Georgia's going to be the really big one, though. Okay, we definitely need Georgia to lose at least one before they see us. And I'm thinking it's probably going to come from Ole Miss. The thing about it is they've got Ole Miss right before they've got us. It's going to be tough for a team like Georgia to lose back-to-back weeks. Now, I don't think that Georgia is as good of a football team, in all honesty, as Texas A&M or as Alabama. I just don't. They're probably more talented than Alabama is. And, it might be a tie between them and Texas A&M. I mean, both of those teams are very talented. Those might be the most two talented teams in the entire SEC, if not in the entire country, if you look at it on paper. I do see with the way that Georgia's offense is so bland, I mean, you can tell what they're going to do from 5 miles away. It's not hard to tell what they're trying to do. And, the question is, can teams match up with them and stop them, or can teams out-scheme them? I believe that a coach like Lane Kiffin can find a way to out-scheme a coach like Kirby Smart. I just do. Lane Kiffin is good for winning 1 to 2 games every season. He's just not supposed to do. Now, Ole Miss is not nearly as talented as Georgia is. But again, I do think that they can turn that game into a little bit of a shootout and give themselves an opportunity to win. That's going to be one that we're going to have to look out for. If Tennessee just continues to win out, not scared of going into Lexington, Kentucky is, like a poor man's version of what Georgia is. They're not nearly as talented as Georgia. Heck, they're not as talented as Tennessee is, but they're going to be very predictable in what they like to do: offense, defense, special teams. That's a game that Tennessee should be able to handle pretty well. And then Mizzou's going to be another tough one. But I feel like we should be able to beat them. Tennessee is a lot more talented than they are. And, we kind of pushed them around a lot last season. Whenever you watch their offense, it's just not very explosive. And, I think Tennessee will be able to have a lot of success up against those two teams. Those are the toughest 2 games left on the schedule outside of Georgia. And, again, we get Georgia at home. Fully expect for Neyland to be rocking. So, saying all that just to say, the opportunities are still there for Tennessee to be able to win the East and maybe even still win the SEC. Will it be enough with 2 losses to make it into the playoffs? Kind of a stretch, but it is possible, okay? It is mathematically still possible at this point in time. So we just have to control what we can, and we have to win out. We've got to stay focused, and we've got to play 60 minutes. And that's going to be it for this one. Thank y'all so much for tuning in. I know that everyone's down right now. This one definitely hurts. It wasn't easy for me to make this video. And, I don't know if I'm going to do a full film breakdown. I was kind of considering it, but I don't know if anyone wants to or can stomach having to look at this game another time. So, I'm going to watch this film, kind of break down what I can, just to have some things moving forward to see where this team can get better at and bring it to y'all. And y'all, give me y'all's thoughts down in the comment section. But as always, please remember to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. We'll see you on the next one.